So Fiona and I are part of the Scottish Centre for Administrative Data Research, which is the ADR Scotland Data Research Centre. And we co-lead on a impact programme called Children's Lives and Outcomes. I'm Morag Treanor, I'm Professor of Child and Family Inequalities at Heriot Watt University in Edinburgh. Fiona and I will be sharing the presentation today, and Fiona will introduce herself in due course. She's Head of Evidence at University of Strathclyde for Looked After Children. So what our project will be doing is we're working together with the Scottish Government from the outset to link administrative data on children's lives and outcomes. What we will end up with is a comprehensive repository of ready to link children's data, which will include data from their education, health, census, looked after children's returns, homelessness data, amongst others. And using this massive data repository, we will be working with the Scottish Government to look at questions, policy relevant questions of interest within Scotland. And Fiona and I are going to discuss how we engage with the government in policy and what our two exemplar projects are. So I'll just hand over to Fiona for a moment.
Hello everyone, I can't turn my camera on because my internet connection isn't very reliable at the moment, so hopefully you can hear me okay. So as Morag was saying, the Scottish Centre for Administrative Data Research is part of ADR Scotland. We, I suppose, are working on the academic research side. We have colleagues in Scottish Government who are working on the research ready data investment side, who I can see are on the call alongside us. So Lisa, David and Celia, who are doing a lot of the work to make some of the data sets that Morag mentioned research ready. So for us, we locate our work within thinking about the National Performance Framework, which is what you can see on the slide here, whereby we're thinking about the potential for administrative data to really evaluate policy impacts over time, as many of the other speakers have spoken to already today. For us, we are thinking about how we understand children's lives and outcomes in the context of the families and households they live within the communities they live within, and the potential to really understand child well-being, children's rights, and progress in relation to policy impacts as well. Maura, can you move on to the next slide, please?
Sorry, Fiona.
No, go on.
We've recently been awarded funding from the ESRC to do two exemplar projects, which we will go into some detail on. My project is about exploring the context, factors and approaches to educational exclusions and absences. And Fiona's project, which she will come and speak about, is about growing up in kinship care and increasing the knowledge of the needs, circumstances and outcomes in children in formal kinship care. These are both policy relevant to the Scottish Government. For my educational exclusions project, excuse me, for my educational exclusions project, in Scotland we have a very different policy context to children's exclusions than you do in the rest of the UK. For example, permanent exclusions were reduced to just 5 individual pupils. However, and even temporary exclusions, non-permanent exclusions are reducing. But however, within that, there is still the differential approach to children having informal exclusions and extended absences, and how that differs across Scotland is something we will explore using administrative data, including how these types of informal exclusions, should we find them, impact on children's educational outcomes and even their post-school destinations. We will, because we're able to link data and school level data and local authority level data, we will be able to look at this from a very granular level at the school. We'll be able to develop profiles of schools based on things such as the number of pupils at the school, the urban-rural profile, the deprivation profile, and we'll be able to look at variation in practice at the school and local authority level. We may be looking at to the extent to which absences, for example, may be masking unofficial exclusions, given that the Scottish policy context is very much about do not exclude children from school. The beauty of using administrative data is that it allows us to access those children who are not often picked up in survey data. the most marginalised or the most vulnerable children, for example, children who are looked after by the state, who may be young carers, who may be in homeless accommodations, those with additional support needs, for example. So we'll be looking at particular groups of children facing particular adversities or disadvantage to see whether they are differentially impacted by these policies, and the data should be able to do that. Within that, we will also be linking to census data, which will give us some family context, and health data, which will give us family context, to see whether we can detect any profiles and family characteristics and circumstances that may act as mediators or moderators in children's outcomes and their exclusions and absences. So I'll just pop on to allow Fiona to discuss her project. I'm hoping Fiona's internet's stable. She gave me a heads up that it was being a bit unstable today.
Sorry, I was on mute.
That's okay.
Yeah, so as Morag was saying, these studies are in an early stage. This study around about kinship care is due to start next year in March, which is working with the timeline in relation to the data infrastructure work that's occurring within Scottish Government currently. The question of what's occurring in relation to patterns of kinship care over time is one that is exercising Scottish Government at the moment. So the questions here relate to really a policy agenda to really better understand what's occurring for children who are living with kinship carers. So this work will actually make use of a longitudinal data set, which there's been a considerable amount of work on structuring and cleaning currently, linked to our child protection data that's returned at a national level, as well as potentially linked to some of our children's hearings data, which is where decisions are made about compulsory intervention in family life in Scotland, and then linked also to health visitor data and educational data. So the intention here is that we look at data regarding children over 15 years to begin to look at the kind of pathways and patterns that relate to children's entry into kinship care, or their placement in kinship care, or their exit out of looked after status and to live with friends and relatives. And that in part is to really understand how the policy focus around about kinship care has evolved over time. We also hope that this work will help us begin to think about how we can link it to other sources of data like census data to really understand some of the more hidden kinship care arrangements that children live within where the state hasn't been involved. So really a kind of focus around about exploring more deeply around about patterns and pathways of kinship care. Will you move on to the next slide, Morag?
So in essence, we have been working with the Scottish Government from the outset on the infrastructure of linking these data sets and also on the policy relevance of our research questions. It's really quite a collaborative approach that the Children's Lives and Outcomes Strategic Impact Project has been able to do for the first time. So we're working on policy and practice relevant questions. We want to be able to answer those questions of how the systems themselves, whether that's the system, the educational framework for inclusions, exclusions and absences, or whether that's the looked after children framework, how the systems themselves affect children's outcomes, and to propose new ways of working, new ways of developing and implementing policy and practice. We would like the decision makers, with both the policy makers and the Scottish Government, and that filter down to local government, the decision makers who influence practice, so that they can be better informed on how best to meet this ambition for Scotland's children that we have, that sits within the national performance framework that Fiona spoke to earlier in the presentation. And Scotland's aim for children is that children grow up loved, safe and protected so they can reach their full potential. And we're hoping that our projects can advise and inform policy and practice to that end.